1. My wife was ashamed of me for 8 years. She never took me to a single corporate event. At her company's year-end party, I started speaking English, then Italian, and finally German. You should have seen her face. But to understand that moment, you need to know how I got there. You need to know who I was to her and who I always was in reality. For 8 years, I was Lilia's dirty secret, the husband who didn't exist outside the walls of our house. She worked at an international consulting firm, elegant suits, meetings with European clients, trips to world capitals. I was a mechanic. I worked in a neighborhood workshop. My hands smelled of grease. My clothes had stains that wouldn't come out with anything. To her, I was the evidence of a past she wanted to erase. She never introduced me to her colleagues. She never mentioned my name at her business dinners. When they asked about her husband, she made up excuses. He's traveling, he's busy, he's sick, anything but the truth. The truth was that I embarrassed her, that my existence ruined the image she had built. The image of a successful, sophisticated woman who had nothing to do with someone like me. But that night, everything changed. And when I say everything, I mean every single thing. It was Friday, December. Lilia came home later than usual. She had that tense expression I knew so well. She closed the door forcefully, dropped her purse on the sofa, looked at me, and I knew something was coming. Elias, I need you to accompany me to the company party tomorrow. I was paralyzed after 8 years, after countless events where I was excluded, after so many times I stayed home alone while she shone in front of others. Now she was inviting me, but her face didn't show joy. It showed obligation. It's mandatory for couples. I can't make up another excuse. Sebastian, my boss, was very clear. Everyone must be accompanied. There was the truth. She didn't want me there. She needed me there. There was a huge difference between those two things, and we both knew it. Of course, I'll go with you. Lilia breathed a sigh of relief, but then came the worst part. I just need you to do something, Elias. Stay quiet. Don't talk to anyone. Don't get into conversations. Smile if necessary. Eat, drink, but please don't say anything that could embarrass me. There was the confirmation of what I always knew. I was an embarrassment, a mistake, something to be hidden. To her, I had nothing valuable to contribute, nothing important to say. I was just the ignorant mechanic who, for some reason, was still married to her. I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength to fight those battles anymore. For years, I tried to show her my worth. I tried to show her who I really was, but she never looked, never listened. She only saw what she wanted to see. A simple man, uneducated, with no future. What she didn't know was that I was hiding something I had kept silent throughout our marriage. Not because it was a secret, but because she never asked, never showed interest, never considered that I could be more than what her eyes saw. I grew up in an immigrant family. My father was Italian, my mother German. At home, we spoke 3 languages before breakfast: Spanish, Italian, German. I learned English in school and then perfected it on my own because I liked it, because languages were my passion, my escape, my way of understanding the world. But Lilia never knew. She never asked about my childhood. She never wanted to know my story. To her, I was just what she saw, a mechanic with dirty hands, and nothing more. That night, I didn't sleep well. Something inside me was waking up, something that had been asleep for too long, a part of me. I decided to silence, to keep the peace, to not make her uncomfortable, to be the invisible husband she needed. But that night, I felt that something was about to break, and I wasn't sure I could stop it. The next morning, I put on my only gray suit, bought years ago for a family wedding. Lilia looked me up and down when I came down the stairs. She frowned, sighed, said nothing, but her silence screamed everything. I wasn't up to par. I never would be. The event was at a hotel downtown, one of those places where everything shines, where every detail costs more than what I earned in a month. Giant chandeliers hung from the ceiling, tables with white tablecloths, huge flower centerpieces. People were dressed like movie stars, men in perfect suits, women in long emerald and silver dresses. I felt small from the moment we walked through the door. Lilia walked ahead. I followed her. She greeted everyone. Perfect smiles, calculated hugs. I stayed behind, always 2 steps behind. No one looked at me. No one asked who I was. It was as if I were wearing a sign that said, "I don't matter." And maybe for them, I really didn't matter. We sat at a table near the center of the room. Lilia immediately started chatting with Carmina, a woman in a wine-colored dress with a fake smile. Carmina was one of those people who look at you as if you were trash, and that night, she looked at me exactly like that. "So you're the famous husband." Her voice had that tone that says everything without saying anything. "Lilia has told me so much about you." A lie. Lilia never talked about me, but I smiled, I nodded, I kept my mouth shut as I had been ordered. Dinner began. Waiters served elegant dishes, food I didn't recognize, expensive wine in crystal glasses. Conversations flowed around us. Business, trips, projects. I ate in silence, invisible, exactly as Lilia wanted. Then, the ballroom door opened, and everything began to change. A man entered the room, accompanied by Sebastian, Lilia's boss. Sebastian had that nervous expression of someone trying to impress at all costs. The man next to him was older, in his 60s, an impeccable charcoal-colored suit, perfectly coiffed gray hair. He walked with that confidence that only real money gives, the money of generations. Sebastian approached the microphone. His voice echoed throughout the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of introducing Mr. Klaus Hoffmann, CEO of Hoffmann Automotive Group, our most important client for the coming year." Polite applause filled the space. Lilia sat up straight in her chair. Her eyes shone with that ambition I knew so well. This was the kind of moment she lived for. The opportunity to impress, to climb, to prove her worth in front of the important people. Klaus Hoffmann greeted with a nod of his head. Sebastian guided him to the main table right next to ours. Perfect. Lilia was already calculating how to approach, how to start conversation, how to get noticed, but then something happened, something no one expected. Klaus began to speak, and his Spanish was terrible, almost non-existent. Sebastian tried to communicate with him in basic English, very basic. The kind of English you learn in 2-month courses. Klaus responded in German, mixed with English words. The communication was a disaster. I could see the frustration growing at the main table. Sebastian was sweating. Pedro, the corporate director, tried to help with his own limited English. Carmina watched the scene with a nervous smile. Lilia observed everything in silence, worried. This wasn't going well. Klaus was asking for something. Sebastian didn't understand. Klaus repeated. Sebastian nodded without understanding. The tension was palpable. This was a client worth millions of dollars, a contract that could change the future of the company, and no one could hold a conversation with him. I looked at Lilia. She was rigid in her seat. Her hands clenched the napkin on her lap. I knew that posture. It was fear. Fear that her company would be ridiculed. Fear of losing the opportunity. Fear that everything would collapse before her eyes. I understood every word Klaus was saying, every phrase in German, every failed attempt at communication. I understood his frustration, his discomfort. He was in a foreign country, surrounded by people who didn't speak his language, feeling isolated exactly as I'd felt for 8 years. Something inside me moved. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was something deeper. It was the recognition that this moment had arrived for a reason, that after 8 years of silence, maybe it was time to speak. Klaus stood up from his chair. His expression was clear. He was considering leaving. Sebastian stood up immediately. He tried to calm him with gestures, with desperate smiles, but Klaus shook his head. He said something in German that Sebastian didn't understand. Herbersted mitnikedist esse Perhoendung. He doesn't understand me. This is a waste of time. Lilia looked at me for a second, barely a second. Her eyes pleaded for something she couldn't express in words. She didn't know I understood what Klaus was saying. She didn't know I could solve all this. But at that moment, her gaze told me something different. It told me, stay quiet. Don't do anything. Don't make this worse. But I had already made a decision. I stood up from my chair. Lilia grabbed my arm. Her nails dug into my skin. Elias, what are you doing? Her voice was a desperate whisper. Sit down, please. I looked at her, and for the first time in 8 years, I really looked at her, not with submission, not with resignation. I looked at her with something I had lost long ago. Dignity. I need to use the bathroom. A lie. I wasn't going to the bathroom. I walked straight towards Klaus's table. My heart was beating fast, not from nerves, but from something different, from the feeling that I was finally going to stop being invisible. Sebastian saw me approaching. His expression was one of total confusion. Who was this man? Why was he approaching? Pedro frowned. Carmina let out an uncomfortable laugh, but I kept walking. I stopped in front of Klaus. He looked at me with that polite but distant expression, the expression of someone who expects nothing from a stranger. And then I spoke. Guten Abend, Herr Hoffmann, is Zisterine in Sullernen. Good evening, Mr. Hoffmann. It's an honor to meet you. The silence that followed was absolute. Klaus stood still. His eyes widened slightly. Sebastian stopped breathing. Pedro leaned forward in his chair. Carmina dropped her glass. The sound of breaking glass against the plate echoed across the table. And Lilia was looking at me as if she had never seen me before in her life. Klaus blinked once, twice, and then a huge smile appeared on his face. Du sprichst Deutsch. His voice sounded relieved, almost excited. In Landersted, you speak German. Finally someone who understands me. Jadis Tuss, I replied with a smile. I bin Jayu Sufan. Yes, I do. I'm here to help. Sebastian looked at us without understanding anything. Klaus turned to him and pointed at me. This Manx German Fennel. We can talk properly. This man speaks German. Finally, we can talk properly. Sebastian looked at me as if I had just appeared out of nowhere, as if I had only just started to exist for him. You speak German. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of disbelief. I nodded. I also speak English and Italian if necessary. The words came out simple, direct, without arrogance, just facts. But the impact was immediate. Sebastian stood up completely straight. Pedro stood up. Carmina closed her mouth that had been left open, and Lilia was still looking at me from our table with an expression I'll never forget. It was a mixture of shock, confusion, and something else, something that resembled fear. Klaus extended his hand. I shook it. Vitesen Psych, YH Musmanen Ihnen sprechen. Please sit down. I need to speak with you. I sat at the main table next to the company's most important client while my wife watched me from a distance. Now she was the invisible one. Klaus began to speak in German, fast, fluent, as if he could finally breathe after being underwater. He told me about his company, about the expansion plans in Latin America, about the frustration of not being able to communicate properly. I listened, responded, translated when necessary so that Sebastian could understand. Sebastian had pulled his chair closer. He was next to me taking notes, as if every word I said were pure gold. Pedro had joined the table too. His expression had completely changed. He no longer looked at me like an intruder. He looked at me like someone valuable, like someone necessary. From the corner of my eye, I could see Lilia. She was still at our table, motionless. Carmina was whispering something in her ear, but Lilia didn't respond. She just looked at me, trying to process what she was seeing, trying to understand how the man she kept hidden for 8 years was now sitting at the most important table in the room, speaking German with a millionaire client. Klaus leaned forward. His eyes showed genuine interest. Wo bin Doodle Iraxen is perfect. Where did you learn German? Your accent is perfect. Memutaris Binchigen. My mother is German. I grew up bilingual. Klaus's eyes lit up. He began to talk to me about his family, about his hometown in Bavaria, about how he missed conversations in his own language when he traveled. I shared anecdotes from my childhood, about family meals where 3 languages were mixed, about my Italian father shouting in the kitchen while my mother answered in German. Sebastian interrupted carefully. His voice trembled slightly. Excuse me, you're Lilia's husband, right? It wasn't really a question, it was a confirmation of something he could barely believe. I nodded. I'm Elias. I work as a mechanic in a workshop in the south of the city. I said it without shame, without trying to embellish the truth. Klaus nodded in approval. I'm Mechaniker. Das ist, the sister literate, a mechanic. That's good. That's honest work. Sebastian swallowed. I could see the wheels turning in his head, try to reconcile the image he had of me with what he was witnessing, trying to understand how Lillian never mentioned that her husband spoke 4 languages, that he could communicate with international clients, that he could be useful. Pedro leaned closer. His voice had that business tone. Elias, you would do us a great favor if you could translate some technical documents. We have several contracts with specifications in German and Italian. We've paid thousands of dollars to external translators. I looked at Pedro, then at Sebastian, then at Klaus, and finally at Lilia. She was still watching. Her face had lost all color. Carmina was no longer talking to her. She was looking at me too. Everyone in the room was looking at us. I'd be happy to help. The words were simple, but the meaning was huge. I had just crossed a line. I had just gone from being the invisible husband to being someone the company needed, someone of value, someone important. Klaus ordered more wine. The waiter brought a different, more expensive bottle. Klaus insisted that I try it first. We toasted, he in German. I responded in German. Sebastian raised his glass without understanding the words, but understanding the moment. The dinner continued, but everything had changed. I was no longer silent. I was no longer the awkward accessory. Now I was the center. Klaus asked me questions about the cars I repaired. I explained in German the systems I knew, the European brands I worked with. He listened fascinated. Wie sind Sie in für Position in Munierman? You know, I'm looking for someone for a position in my company. Sebastian sat up straight, immediately, even though he hadn't understood anything. What's he saying? His voice sounded anxious. I translated. He says he's looking for someone for a position in his company. Pedro almost fell out of his chair, leaning forward. We could recommend several candidates from our team. Klaus shook his head before I finished translating. Name Sprichonen. I'm not talking about him. He pointed at me. The silence returned. Heavier than before, denser, more impossible to ignore. About me. I repeated in Spanish, looking at Sebastian. Yes, about you. Klaus switched to English. His accent was strong, but the words were clear. I need a technical director for Latin America. Someone who understands cars, who speaks languages, and can communicate with our teams in Europe. Pedro opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Sebastian was blinking as if trying to wake from a dream. Carmina had stopped pretending not to listen and was looking directly at us with her mouth open. And Lilia had stood up. She was walking towards our table. Her steps were rigid, mechanical, as if her body were moving against her will. Her face was a mask of contradictory emotions. Klaus continued speaking. He mentioned numbers. Annual salary of $120,000. Performance bonuses, trips to Germany and Italy. Office in the main capitals, company car, everything you'd expect from a real executive position. I just listened, processed, felt how each word changed something fundamental inside me. It wasn't just the job. It wasn't just the money. It was the recognition. It was the validation. It was the proof that I was always more than what Lilia saw. Lilia reached the table. She stood behind me. Her hand touched my shoulder lightly, as if she wasn't sure she had the right to touch me. Elias. Her voice was small, almost inaudible. Klaus looked at her, smiled politely. You must be very proud of your husband, madam. He's a very talented man. Lilia tried to smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It didn't reach anywhere. It just hung on her lips like a broken mask. Yes, very. The words sounded hollow, false. Everyone noticed. Sebastian cleared his throat. His voice had that uncomfortable tone of someone who has just realized something terrible. Lillian never mentioned to us that Elias spoke German or Italian or that he had experience with European brands. It wasn't a direct reproach, but the message was clear. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you keep this hidden? Why waste this resource? Lilia didn't answer. She couldn't. Anything she said would be an admission, a confession that she had deliberately hidden me, that she had considered me useless, that she had been ashamed of me for no real reason. Klaus handed me his card. Thick cardboard, gold embossed letters. Think about it, Elias. Call me next week. I'd like to talk more about this opportunity. I took the card. It felt heavy in my hand. Not because of the material, but because of what it represented, the way out, the opportunity, the definitive proof that I was worth something, that I was always worth something. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. I'll consider it seriously. Klaus nodded, satisfied. He stood up from the table. Sebastian hurried to accompany him. Pedro followed. Carmina slunk back to her seat, and suddenly Lilia and I were alone in the middle of the crowded room. She was looking at me. I was looking at her, and between us there were 8 years of silence, 8 years of shame, 8 years of being invisible. All of that hung in the air like thick smoke. Lilia was still standing in front of me. Her hands were shaking slightly. She was trying to maintain her composure, but I could see the cracks. I could see how everything she thought she knew was collapsing before her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She closed her lips, swallowed, tried again. Elias, I didn't know. Her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know you spoke German or Italian. You never told me. I looked at her without saying anything. I let the silence speak for me. I let her hear everything I'd kept quiet for years. Finally, I answered, you never asked, Lilia. In 8 years. You never asked about my family, about my childhood, about what I liked. You never wanted to know who I really was. She stepped back as if I had hit her. Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. We were surrounded by her colleagues, by her corporate world. She couldn't afford to cry here. She couldn't afford to show weakness. I tried, she started to say, but she stopped because we both knew it was a lie. She never tried. She never cared enough. Sebastian returned to the table. His energy had completely changed. Now he looked at me with a mixture of respect and calculation. He saw opportunities, he saw value, he saw something he could use. Elias, I'd like to talk to you on Monday. We have several projects where your skills would be invaluable. Translations, communication with international clients, maybe even consulting. Lilia looked at him. Her expression was one of barely contained panic. She was seeing how her world was changing, how I was going from being her secret shame to being someone her boss valued, someone her company needed. Of course, Sebastian. We can talk. Sebastian smiled, patted my shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie he would never have made an hour before. When I was just Lilia's silent husband, the unimportant man. Excellent. Lilia has my information. Have her coordinated. His gaze fell on Lilia. And there was something there, an implicit question. Why didn't we know this before? Why did you hide this resource from us? Lilia nodded stiffly. Sebastian walked away again. He went back to Klaus, who was talking with Pedro near the bar. I could see them looking at me occasionally, talking, planning. I had become a valuable piece on their corporate chessboard. Carmina approached our table. Her wine-colored dress shone under the lights. Her smile was different. Now there was no contempt. Now there was curiosity, interest, opportunism. Elias, what a surprise. Her voice had that sweet, false tone. Lilia is very lucky to have you. You speak 4 languages. It's incredible. Lilia looked at her with an expression that could kill. Carmina noticed. Her smile widened. She was enjoying this. She enjoyed seeing Lilia squirm, seeing how the dynamic had changed. Yes, very lucky, I replied without emotion. Carmina expected more. She expected me to flirt, to feel flattered by her sudden attention, but I knew her type. I knew exactly what she was doing. We should have lunch sometime. Carmina continued. I'd love to hear about your experience with European cars. I have a BMW that's been giving me trouble. Lilia stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor. The sound echoed across the table. I need some air. Her voice was tense. Elias, are you coming? It wasn't a question, it was an order. But this time something was different. This time she needed me to go. It wasn't her dragging me, it was her asking me. I stood up, followed Lilia to the balcony. The cold December air hit my face. The noise of the room faded behind the glass door. We were alone, finally alone. Lilia walked to the railing. She rested her hands on the metal. Her back was rigid. Her shoulders were trembling. Not from the cold, from something much deeper. I don't understand. Her voice broke. Why did you never tell me? Why did you keep this hidden? I approached. I stood beside her looking at the illuminated city below us. I told you, Lilia. On our second date, I told you about my family, about the languages, about everything, but you didn't listen. You said it was nice, and changed the subject. After that, you never asked again. She turned to look at me. The tears were finally falling down her face. Her makeup was running in black lines. She tried to deny, but she stopped because the memory was coming back. I could see it in her eyes. The moment in the Italian restaurant. Me talking to the waiter in Italian, her laughing, saying how nice, and then talking about her new job, about her ambitions, about her future. My past wasn't relevant to her narrative. I thought you were. She stopped. She couldn't finish the sentence. You thought I was what, Lilia? Finish the sentence. I thought you were simple. The words came out like a broken whisper. I thought you were uneducated, that you weren't enough. There it was, the naked truth, raw, unfiltered. For 8 years, she considered me inferior. For 8 years, she built an image of me based on assumptions, on prejudices, on shame. And that's why you hid me. That's why you never took me to any event. That's why you asked me to stay quiet tonight. She nodded, crying openly. Now, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Elias. I didn't know if I had known. But that's the problem. Lilia, you shouldn't have had to know. It shouldn't matter if I speak 4 languages or none. It shouldn't matter if I'm a mechanic or an executive. I'm your husband. You should have valued me anyway. The words fell between us like heavy stones, definitive, irrevocable. Lilia reached her hand out to me. She tried to touch my arm. I moved away. Not abruptly, I just moved, I put distance. She let her hand fall. What are you going to do? Her voice trembled. About Klaus's offer. What are you going to do? I looked towards the horizon. The city lights flickered. Thousands of lives, thousands of stories, thousands of people searching for their place. I'm going to consider it seriously. It's a good opportunity. 120,000 a year, international travel, respect, recognition, everything I never had with you, but we're a team. Lilia tried to argue. We're a couple. You can't make decisions like that without consulting me. I looked at her directly, without anger, without resentment, just with clarity. You made decisions about me for 8 years without consulting me. You decided to hide me. You decided to be ashamed of me. You decided I wasn't worth it. You never asked me how that made me feel. You never cared. But I love you. She sobbed. Despite everything, I love you, Elias. You love the idea of me. You love having someone at home waiting for you, someone who doesn't question you, who doesn't challenge you, who stays small so you can feel big, but that person doesn't exist anymore, Lilia. That person died tonight. Don't say that. Her voice was desperate. We can fix this. I can change. I promise you. I've heard those promises before. After every fight, after every time I try to talk. There are always promises, but nothing really changes because the problem isn't what you do, Lilia, it's how you see me. And that can't be fixed with promises. The balcony door opened. Pedro peeked his head out. His expression was awkward. He was clearly interrupting something. Excuse me. Klaus is leaving. He wants to talk to Elias before he goes. I nodded. I looked at Lilia one last time. We should go back. She wiped her face with her hands. She tried to compose herself, but the damage was visible. Her ruined makeup, her red eyes, her shattered expression. We returned to the room. She walked beside me, but the distance between us was immense. Klaus was waiting for me near the exit. Sebastian and Pedro were with him. Several other employees had also approached. Everyone wanted to say goodbye to the important client. Everyone wanted to be near the person who had just changed the social hierarchy of the event. Elias Klaus extended his hand. Ich freue mich Funzer Natches Hesprach. I look forward to our next conversation. Ich Hocher Hoffman. Me too. We shook hands. Firm, respectful, as equals. Klaus turned to Lilia. He offered her a polite smile. Take care of this man, madam. He's very valuable. Lilia tried to smile, but the smile was a shadow, a ghost of what it should be. I will. But we both knew it was too late for that. Klaus left the room, followed by Sebastian and Pedro. The three of them disappeared through the double doors. The murmur of conversations filled the space immediately, but all eyes were still on me. On us. Lilia and I had become the spectacle of the night. The couple no one really knew, the invisible husband who turned out to be the complete opposite. Carmina approached again. This time she brought 2 other women with her. One wore an ivory-colored suit. the other a long silver dress. Both looked at me with that barely disguised curiosity. Elias, these are Margarita and Nyla. They work in the International Expansion Department. I was telling them about your linguistic skills. Margarita extended her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Lilia had never told us about you. Now I understand why. She wanted to keep you a secret. The phrase sounded like a compliment, but the tone had an edge, a veiled accusation towards Lilia. Everyone in that company knew that Lilia never mentioned her husband. Now, they were all wondering why. Now, they were all drawing their own conclusions. Nyla smiled. Her expression was calculating. We have several contracts with Italian suppliers. The technical documents are a headache. External translators charge fortunes and take weeks. If you could help us, it would be invaluable. Lilia squeezed my arm. Her fingers dug into my skin through the suit. It was a warning, a silent plea. Don't commit. Don't give them anything. But I no longer responded to her invisible signals. I'd be happy to review the documents. We can coordinate during the week. Margarita and Nyla exchanged looks of satisfaction. Carmina smiled broadly. Lilia released my arm. Her hand fell limply to her side. Perfect. Margarita took out her phone. Give me your number. I gave her my number. She saved it immediately. Nyla did the same. Carmina too. In a matter of minutes, I had gone from being nobody to having direct contact with 3 executives of the company. 3 women who probably earned triple what Lilia did. 3 women who now saw me as a valuable resource. The rest of the night passed in a strange sequence. People who had never looked at me now approached, asked questions, showed interest, wanted to know about my experience, about the cars I repaired, about how I learned the languages, about everything Lilia never considered important. An older man introduced himself as Victor, director of operations. He had that air of quiet authority. He told me about a project in Milan, about the need for someone who could communicate directly with the Italian partners. He asked if I'd be interested in traveling, in participating, in being part of something bigger. I listened, responded, processed every offer, every opportunity, every door that opened in front of me. And all the while Lilia was by my side, silent, watching as the man she kept hidden for years now shone in front of everyone. How everyone wanted him, how everyone valued him. Around midnight, the party began to wind down. People said their goodbyes, collected their coats, exchanged last words. Sebastian approached one more time. His hand on my shoulder felt almost paternal. Now, Elias, it's been a real pleasure to truly meet you tonight. I hope to see you on Monday. We have a lot to talk about. He looked at Lilia. His expression changed. There was some reproach there, some disappointment. Lilia, we should have met Elias much sooner. He's an incredible asset. The word asset resonated in the air. I was an asset now, a tool, a resource. It wasn't better than how Lilia had seen me, just different. But at least now I was visible, at least now I existed. Lilia forced a smile. You're right, Sebastian. It's been my mistake. Sebastian nodded, walked away. Lilia and I were left alone in the middle of the increasingly empty room. The waiters were clearing plates, folding tablecloths. The sparkle of the night was fading, leaving only the naked reality. We should go. Lilia's voice sounded tired, defeated. We walked to the exit, collected our coats. The valet brought the car, a gray sedan Lilia had bought the year before. We got in. The silence inside the car was dense, suffocating. Lilia started the engine, but didn't move. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. What has happened? Her voice broke. How is it that I didn't know you? How is it that I was married to you for 8 years and didn't know any of this? You didn't know Lilia. I told you, I showed you, but you didn't want to see because seeing meant admitting you were wrong, that your assumptions about me were false, and that would have challenged the whole narrative you built. But why didn't you insist? Why didn't you make me listen? I really looked at her. I saw the woman I had married, the woman I once loved, the woman who had slowly turned me into a shadow. Because I shouldn't have had to force you. Because in a real relationship, your partner is naturally interested, asks naturally, values naturally. I shouldn't have had to fight for your attention for 8 years. Lilia started crying again. Her tears fell silently. She didn't try to wipe them away. She just cried as she gripped the steering wheel, as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored. You're going to leave me. It wasn't a question. It was an understanding, an acceptance of the inevitable. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But I know I can't keep being who I was. I can't go back to being invisible. Not after tonight. What if I offer you everything I didn't give you before? What if I change? What if I include you in everything? What if I value you like I always should have? Her words sounded desperate, but there was something else there. There was fear of losing me, but not for who I was, but for what I represented now, for the status, for the connections, for the value that others had recognized. I don't know if it's enough, Lilia. The damage is done. 8 years of damage. 8 years of feeling less than. 8 years of being your secret. That can't be erased with promises. So what do you want? Tell me what you want, and I'll do it. I want you to have valued me when I was just a mechanic, when I didn't speak languages that were useful to you, when I didn't have million-dollar job offers. I want you to have loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for you. She didn't answer because there was no answer to that. She couldn't go back and change the past. She couldn't erase the years of shame, the events where I was excluded, the conversations where I was silenced. All of that existed. All of that was real. All of that had created a crack between us that was perhaps too big to repair. Finally, Lilia put the car in drive. She drove in silence. The streets were empty. The city was sleeping. Only the sound of the engine filled the space. We arrived home, a small apartment in an old building, the place where we had built our life, or at least where I had tried to build it. We went inside. Lilia went straight to the bedroom, closed the door behind her. I stayed in the living room. I sat on the sofa, took Klaus's card out of my pocket, looked at it under the lamplight, thick cardboard, gold letters, Klaus Hoffman, CEO, Hoffman Automotive Group, a phone number, an email, a door to something different. I took out my phone, opened my messages. I had 3 new ones, one for Margarita, one for Nyla, one for Victor. All asking about my availability, all offering projects, all wanting my time, my expertise, my value. I looked at the closed bedroom door. I heard the muffled sound of Lilia crying. Part of me wanted to go, to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But another part, a bigger, more honest part, knew that nothing would ever be okay again. Not like before, because before was a lie, an illusion of a marriage where only one of us was real. I lay back on the sofa, closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I just thought, processed. I felt how everything was changing. How I was changing. Tonight I had crossed a threshold. I had stopped being invisible, and there was no going back. Monday came too quickly. I woke up on the sofa with an aching body. Lilia had left early. There was no breakfast together. There was no conversation, just a note on the kitchen table. Going to the office early. I need to think. Her handwriting was shaky, hurried, as if she had written the words before regretting it. I showered. I got dressed in my work clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, worn-out boots. It was Monday, a normal day. I had to go to the workshop, but when I grabbed the keys to my truck, something stopped me. I looked at my phone. The messages were still there. Margarita, Nyla, Victor, and a new one from Sebastian. Elias, I'll be in the office all day. Come whenever you can. We have a lot to discuss. I made a decision. I called Joaquin, my boss at the workshop. A good, honest man. He had given me a job when no one else would. Joaquin, I need the day off. His voice sounded surprised. You never asked for days off, Elias. Everything okay? Yes, everything's fine. I just need to sort out some personal matters. Okay. See you tomorrow then. I hung up. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, the same man as always. But something in my eyes had changed. There was a determination there, a clarity that didn't exist before. I took off my work clothes. I put on the gray suit again, the same one from the party. It was the only formal thing I had. It would have to do. I drove downtown to the building where Lilia worked, a skyscraper of glass and steel, 30 floors of corporate ambition. I parked in the basement. The security guard looked at me curiously when I gave him my name. He checked his list, nodded. He gave me a temporary pass. Floor 22, management offices. The elevator went up in silence. The doors opened to an elegant hallway, marble floor, white walls, modern art I didn't understand. A receptionist smiled at me from her desk. Elias, I presume. Sebastian is waiting for you. First door on the right. I walked down the hallway. My footsteps echoed. I knocked on the door. Sebastian's voice invited me in. His office was exactly what you'd expect. Large, panoramic view of the city, mahogany desk, shelves full of books he had probably never read. Elias Sebastian stood up, shook my hand enthusiastically. Thanks for coming. Sit down, please. I sat across from him. Sebastian settled into his chair, clasped his hands on the desk. His expression was pure business. I spoke with Klaus this morning. He's very impressed with you. He wants to speed up the hiring process. But before you make any decisions with him, I need to make you an offer. I listened in silence. Sebastian continued. We want to hire you as an external consultant. Translations, communication with international clients, assistance in negotiations. We pay you $50 an hour. Flexible work from home, if you want. We estimate we'd need at least 20 hours a week. That's $4,000 a month, $48,000 a year. In addition to your current job at the workshop. He paused. He let the numbers sink in. It was good money, very good money for part-time work. But there was something else in his offer. There was desperation. There was fear of losing me to Klaus. It's a generous offer, Sebastian. It is, and there's room for growth. If things go well, we could talk about a full-time position, benefits, health insurance, bonuses. But Klaus is offering $120,000 a year, international travel, a real executive position. Sebastian leaned back in his chair. His jaw tensed slightly. Klaus would take you far from here, far from your life, your family, from Lilia. Our offer allows you to maintain stability, maintain your marriage, grow professionally without sacrificing your personal life. There was the real argument. They didn't want me for my talent alone. They wanted me because losing me meant losing access to something valuable. And also because Lilia had probably asked him to. She had probably begged Sebastian to make me a counteroffer, to keep me close, to not let me go. I need to think about it, Sebastian. These are big decisions. Of course, take your time, but Klaus is expecting an answer this week, so not too much time. Understood. I stood up to leave. Sebastian stopped me with a question. Elias, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Why did Lilia never tell us about you, about your skills? For years, she worked here and never mentioned her husband spoke 4 languages, that he had experience with European brands. Why? It was the question everyone was asking, the question floating in every conversation, the question that defined everything. Because she was ashamed of me, because I'm a mechanic, because I don't fit into this world, because for her, I was a mistake that needed to be hidden. Sebastian frowned. He processed my words. He tried to reconcile them with the image he had of Lilia, the brilliant professional, the exemplary employee. He didn't know what to say. That's very sad, Elias. It is, but it's the truth. I left his office, walked down the hallway back to the elevator. Then I saw her. Lilia was coming out of a meeting room. She was carrying a folder under her arm, wearing her dark gray work suit, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. But when our eyes met, I saw the panic. Elias. Her voice was barely audible. What are you doing here, Sebastian? He called me. We had to talk. She looked toward Sebastian's office, then at me. Her eyes were searching for answers. What did he tell you? He offered me a job. External consultant. $50 an hour. Lilia let out a sigh of relief. It's good, very good. We can work together, be close, fix things. Or I can accept Klaus's offer. $120,000 a year. Executive position. Start something new far from here. The relief on her face evaporated. It was replaced by pure terror. You can't do that. You can't leave me. We're a team, Elias. We're a couple. A team doesn't hide its members. A couple isn't ashamed of the other. But I'm sorry, I'm changing. Give me a chance to prove it to you. Carmina came out of another office. She saw us talking. She approached with that smile. I already knew. Fake, calculating. Elias, what a surprise to see you here. Is Lilia finally giving you an office tour? The comment was poison-wrapped in sweetness. Lilia glared at her, but Carmina didn't flinch. Actually, I came to meet with Sebastian. He offered me a position. Carmina raised her eyebrows. Really, how wonderful. So you're going to work with us? Lilia must be thrilled. Lilia didn't answer. Carmina was enjoying every second of her discomfort. Although, I heard Klaus Hoffmann also made you an offer. Carmina continued. The whole office is talking about it. It's the talk of the town. Lilia's secret husband who turned out to be a polyglot genius with million-dollar offers. Every word was a knife. Lilia clutched the folder to her chest as if it were a shield. Excuse me, I have work to do. Lilia tried to escape, but Carmina wasn't finished. You know Elias? You should have lunch with us. Margarita, Nyla, and I are going to that new Italian restaurant. You could practice your Italian with the chef. It will be fun. Lilia was looking at me. Her eyes begged me to say no, to refuse the invitation, to stay with her, but something inside me rebelled. For 8 years I did what she wanted. For 8 years I was invisible when she asked. For 8 years I put her needs before mine. Sound good, Carmina? What time? Carmina's smile widened. Lilia turned pale. At 1. I'll send you the address. Carmina walked away with a triumphant stride. Lilia and I were left alone in the hallway. Employees passed by occasionally. Some looked at us with curiosity. The invisible husband was now visible, and everyone wanted to see the drama unfold. You're having lunch with her. Lilia's voice trembled with contained anger. With Carmina, the woman who's been trying to undermine me for years. I'm having lunch with potential colleagues, people who value my skills, who want to get to know me, who aren't ashamed of me. This is revenge. You're punishing me. This is living, Lilia. This is existing outside of your shadow. This is being seen. And if maybe there's some justice in that, maybe you need to feel what I felt for years. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they didn't fall. Not here, not in front of her colleagues. She turned and walked towards her office. Her heels clicked against the marble. Strong, determined, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. The weight she was carrying. The Italian restaurant was exactly the kind of place Lilia frequented. White tablecloths, soft background music, prices that made normal people cry. I arrived 5 minutes late. Carmina, Margarita, and Nyla were already seated at a table by the window. Altri vengas aquí y no entres en la casa porque es una zona de desastre de suministros médicos y gérmenes. Colgó antes de que pudiera discutir, pero el silencio del vecindario fue roto por una voz del patio adyacente. Mi vecina de toda la vida, la señora Miller, estaba de pie junto a la valla sosteniendo una manguera de jardín y negando con la cabeza con una mirada de puro asco dirigida a la casa de mi madre. Me hizo una seña para que me acercara con un gesto de la mano, y caminé hasta el límite de la propiedad, sintiéndome confundida por la información contradictoria que estaba recibiendo. Señora Miller, ¿sabe cuándo se fueron al hospital? Pregunté, esperando algo de claridad. La señora Miller soltó una carcajada aguda que sonaba desprovista de cualquier humor. Hospital, ¿eso es lo que te dijo? Los vi meterse en un taxi a las 6 de esta mañana, con un aspecto como si estuvieran listos para una fiesta de vacaciones de primavera. La miré con incredulidad porque mi cerebro no podía conciliar la imagen de mi hermana moribunda con unas vacaciones. Pero mamá dijo que Whitney está en estado crítico y que la llevaron de urgencia al hospital. La señora Miller cerró la manguera y se inclinó sobre la valla para mirarme directamente a los ojos. ¡Qué emergencia! Acaba de sacar una tabla de surf gigante y la metió en el maletero. Eres demasiado ingenua, Audrey. Así que entra y mira esa casa vacía por ti misma. Sus palabras me golpearon como un golpe físico, y volví a la puerta principal con las manos temblorosas para recuperar la llave de repuesto que guardaba escondida bajo un ladrillo suelto en la maceta. La cerradura se abrió con un clic y entré en el vestíbulo esperando el olor a enfermedad o a antiséptico. Pero en cambio, la casa olía a rancio y completamente normal. Revisé los dormitorios de abajo, pero no encontré nada fuera de lugar. Así que subí las estrechas escaleras hasta el ático donde guardábamos viejas decoraciones navideñas y recuerdos. El ático estaba polvoriento y oscuro, pero una mancha de color brillante en la esquina me llamó la atención de inmediato. Era la maleta roja de Whitney, la grande que solía usar para los viajes de la universidad, tirada descuidadamente sobre un montón de mantas viejas, como si alguien hubiera estado revolviendo en ella recientemente. Me arrodillé junto a la maleta y abrí el compartimento principal, esperando encontrar ropa de invierno o quizás viejos álbumes de fotos que estuviera conservando. Lo que encontré en cambio hizo que se me cortara la respiración porque la maleta estaba llena de un caótico desorden de papeleo y material de oficina. Cogí una pila de papeles y me di cuenta con horror de que estaba viendo un taller de falsificación improvisado justo allí en nuestro ático. Había membretes de hospital que habían sido claramente cortados y pegados de internet junto con hojas de práctica donde alguien había estado intentando replicar la firma de un médico una y otra vez. Encontré facturas de medicamentos de quimioterapia que en realidad eran solo plantillas editadas con los precios inflados en miles de dólares usando una fuente diferente. Mis manos temblaban violentamente mientras cavaba más profundo y encontraba un cuaderno que detallaba sus gastos, que enumeraba tarifas de resort y tiendas de ropa de diseñador en lugar de copagos. La comprensión de que el cáncer de mi hermana no era más que un proyecto de arte construido con tijeras y pegamento me hizo sentir como si fuera a vomitar allí mismo en el suelo polvoriento. Quería gritar y destrozar la casa, pero una voz fría y racional en mi cabeza me dijo que me detuviera. Si las confrontaba ahora por teléfono mientras bebían cócteles en una playa, negarían todo y volverían a casa para destruir esta evidencia antes de que pudiera probar algo legal. Coloqué cuidadosamente los documentos fraudulentos de nuevo en la maleta exactamente como los encontré y la cerré para ocultar mi intrusión. Salí de esa casa con un sabor a bilis en la garganta y cerré la puerta detrás de mí, sabiendo que la próxima vez que volviera traería a un abogado en lugar de comestibles. A la mañana siguiente, cuando la fría luz del sol invernal se filtró en mi impersonal habitación de hotel, comencé mi investigación privada con una mente que se había vuelto peligrosamente fría. Me senté en el pequeño escritorio de madera y extendí las fotografías digitales que había tomado en secreto de los documentos fraudulentos dentro de la maleta para cotejar cada detalle. Mis manos estaban firmes mientras marcaba el número de contacto impreso en el membrete del departamento de oncología porque necesitaba una confirmación absoluta antes de poder destruir a mi propia familia. Navegué a través de una serie de menús automáticos hasta que finalmente llegué a una asistente administrativa humana que sonaba agotada pero dispuesta a ayudar a verificar sus registros de pacientes actuales. Proporcioné el nombre legal completo de mi hermana y su fecha de nacimiento mientras contenía la respiración y rezaba para que quizás solo fuera una hermana paranoica que había malinterpretado la situación. El silencio al otro lado de la línea se prolongó durante lo que pareció una eternidad antes de que la recepcionista volviera con un tono de voz confuso. Señora, he revisado nuestra lista de pacientes hospitalizados actuales y nuestros registros archivados de los últimos 3 años, pero no tenemos absolutamente ningún paciente con ese nombre. Sentí un escalofrío recorrer mi espina dorsal, pero insistí más pidiendo hablar con el especialista que figuraba en los papeles que encontré. La recepcionista dudó antes de asestar el golpe final a mi esperanza. Señora, no tenemos ningún médico llamado Dr. Wilson en el departamento de oncología, por lo que debería verificar su información porque podría ser víctima de una estafa. La confirmación de que el doctor no existía solidificó mi resolución. Así que, inmediatamente busqué la información de contacto del exnovio de Whitney, Rick, con quien había salido justo antes de su supuesto diagnóstico. Quedé en encontrarme con él en una tranquila cafetería en las afueras de la ciudad donde esperaba no encontrar a nadie que conociera mi familia o sus retorcidos secretos. Rick llegó con aspecto escéptico y reservado con su uniforme de mecánico, pero aceptó hablar conmigo después de que le prometí invitarlo a almorzar y explicarle por qué hacía preguntas. Dudé antes de preguntarle por qué se habían separado realmente porque mi madre había afirmado que él se fue porque era demasiado débil para manejar la tragedia de su enfermedad. Rick soltó una carcajada aguda y amarga que atrajo la atención de los otros clientes en la cafetería antes de negar con la cabeza con incredulidad. ¿Hablas en serio ahora mismo? ¿Eso es lo que te dijo que me fui porque se negaba a conseguir un trabajo y esperaba que yo pagara su estilo de vida de champán con un sueldo de mecánico? Sacó su teléfono inteligente agrietado y navegó hasta un perfil de redes sociales que nunca había visto antes porque mi propia cuenta claramente había sido bloqueada para verlo. Deslizó el teléfono sobre la mesa para que pudiera ver el flujo de actualizaciones recientes que pintaban una imagen muy diferente de mi hermana moribunda. Rick señaló la pantalla con un dedo manchado de grasa y habló con un asco palpable. ¿Ella supuestamente enferma la semana pasada? Estaba bailando sobre una mesa en un club del centro y presumiendo del nuevo bolso de diseñador que compró con tu dinero de caridad. Miré la pantalla brillante para ver un video de mi hermana luciendo vibrante y saludable mientras sostenía una botella de vodka caro en un reservado VIP. El pie de foto debajo agradecía a sus generosos patrocinadores por hacer realidad sus sueños, lo que me hizo sentir físicamente enferma. La revelación más devastadora llegó cuando deslicé a la siguiente foto y vi a mi madre al fondo de una selfie en la playa sonriendo y sosteniendo un cóctel a juego. Finalmente entendí que mi madre no era una víctima indefensa manipulada por una hija enferma, sino la directora de toda esta cruel producción. Esa noche, mientras estaba sentada sola en el silencio de mi apartamento vacío, miré el teléfono en la mesa de café y me di cuenta de que finalmente había llegado al punto de quiebre donde tenía que hacer la llamada fatídica para tender mi trampa final. Respiré varias veces profunda y tranquilamente para forzar mi corazón acelerado a un ritmo calmado porque necesitaba ejecutar esta actuación perfectamente si quería atraparlas en su propia red de mentiras. Sentí las manos frías mientras marcaba el número familiar de mi madre y me preparaba para interpretar el papel de la hija hermosa e ingenua una última vez antes de destrozar esa imagen para siempre. Mi madre respondió al tercer timbre con una voz tan cargada de tristeza actuada que casi dudé antes de lanzarme al guión que había ensayado en el espejo durante la última hora. Forcé un tono de alegría histérica en mi voz mientras gritaba al receptor sobre un giro milagroso de los acontecimientos que supuestamente acababa de ocurrir en la sede de mi empresa. Mamá, no vas a creer las increíbles noticias que tengo porque acabo de ser ascendida a directora regional y la empresa me dio una bonificación por firmar de $50,000 en efectivo. El silencio al otro lado de la línea duró solo una fracción de segundo antes de que la atmósfera cambiara por completo. Mi madre abandonó su acto de cuidadora cansada al instante mientras su voz se transformaba de un gemido lastimero a un tono de dulzura empalagosa que me puso la piel de gallina. Ni siquiera se detuvo a felicitarme por mi arduo trabajo antes de pasar inmediatamente a cómo este dinero podría servir a sus propios propósitos egoístas. Oh, gracias a Dios. Este dinero es verdaderamente un milagro divino porque el especialista nos acaba de decir esta mañana que Whitney necesita una cirugía de emergencia que cuesta exactamente esa cantidad o podría no sobrevivir al mes. Me mordí el labio para no gritar ante la audacia de su mentira porque sabía a ciencia cierta que no existía ningún médico y que mi hermana estaba perfectamente sana. Mantuve la voz firme mientras le decía que quería usar el dinero para salvar a Whitney, pero insistí en que no podía confiar en una transferencia bancaria con una suma tan grande. Le dije firmemente que conduciría a casa este próximo fin de semana para entregar el dinero en efectivo personalmente porque necesitaba ver a Whitney antes de que entrara al hospital para este supuesto procedimiento. Mi madre intentó argumentar que una transferencia bancaria sería más rápida, pero escuché un forcejeo al otro lado de la línea cuando el teléfono fue arrebatado violentamente. Whitney gritó al receptor con una voz que no sonaba en absoluto como una mujer moribunda, y sí como una niña codiciosa a la que acababan de ofrecerle una montaña de dulces. Audrey, escúchame. Asegúrate de traer cada centavo de esos $50,000 en efectivo porque tengo demasiado dolor para esperar a que los bancos procesen una transferencia. Su agresiva demanda de efectivo confirmó todo lo que sospechaba sobre su desesperación y su completa falta de conciencia con respecto a mi bienestar financiero. Le prometí que estaría allí el sábado con el maletín y colgué el teléfono antes de perder la compostura y decirles exactamente lo que pensaba de su comportamiento desalmado. Desconecté la llamada con un dedo tembloroso e inmediatamente marqué un número diferente para hablar con mi abogado personal que esperaba mi señal. Le instruí para que finalizara la denuncia penal por fraude electrónico y robo mediante engaño porque ahora tenía su confirmación verbal de que estaban solicitando fondos para un procedimiento médico ficticio. Me recosté en mi sofá y miré el techo oscuro mientras sentía una fría resolución apoderarse de mí porque sabía que la próxima vez que viera a mi familia, sería la última vez que me vieran como su víctima. Ese fin de semana, conduje un sedán negro alquilado a la casa de mi infancia en Fort Wayne, llevando un pesado maletín de cuero que contenía la destrucción total en lugar de la salvación financiera que esperaban con avidez. Estacioné el vehículo directamente en la entrada detrás del coche de mi madre, y me tomé un momento para agarrar el volante hasta que mis nudillos se pusieron blancos porque necesitaba armarme de valor para la actuación de mi vida. Caminé por el sendero de cemento con el maletín apretado firmemente en mi mano derecha, y abrí la puerta principal sin llamar porque quería atraparlas en medio de su ensayo final. La escena que me esperaba dentro de la sala de estar estaba tan elaboradamente montada que por una fracción de segundo casi admiré su dedicación a la narrativa de tragedia que habían tejido durante 2 años. Mi madre había empujado los muebles contra las paredes para hacer espacio para una cama de hospital alquilada donde Whitney yacía temblando bajo una fina manta con la cabeza envuelta en una gruesa bufanda para simular la pérdida de cabello. Mi madre se apresuró a recibirme con las manos juntas en un gesto de oración desesperada mientras grandes lágrimas artificiales corrían por sus mejillas para perfeccionar la imagen de una madre afligida. Me atrajo hacia un abrazo sofocante que se sintió increíblemente frío y calculado porque podía sentir sus ojos mirando por encima de mi hombro para observar con avidez el maletín de cuero que sostenía. Se apartó para mirarme con la barbilla temblorosa y susurró que había llegado justo a tiempo porque Whitney se estaba desvaneciendo rápidamente y el servicio de ambulancia solo esperaba el depósito en efectivo para venir a recogerla. Miré por encima de su hombro para ver a Whitney soltar un gemido teatral de dolor que sonaba más como una adolescente aburrida que como una paciente moribunda. Mientras se acomodaba confortablemente en el costoso colchón médico, pasé junto a mi madre sin decir una palabra y coloqué el maletín deliberadamente en la mesa de café antes de hundirme en el sillón que solía pertenecer a mi padre. Crucé las piernas con calma y las miré con una expresión indescifrable porque quería ver hasta dónde llegarían para asegurar el dinero antes de que les quitara la alfombra de debajo de los pies. Antes de entregar todos los ahorros de mi vida, necesito verificar algunos detalles específicos sobre el plan de cuidados postoperatorios que el Dr. Wilson ha delineado para su recuperación. Dije con una voz que era peligrosamente firme. Mi madre se congeló por un momento antes de intercambiar una mirada nerviosa con Whitney, que había dejado de gemir para escuchar atentamente la conversación sobre su tratamiento imaginario. Las presioné más preguntando sobre la dosis específica de la anestesia y el nombre del anestesiólogo que realizaría el procedimiento en el hospital esa noche. Mi madre comenzó a tartamudear incoherentemente mientras intentaba inventar terminología médica sobre la marcha mientras se subía la manta para ocultar el hecho de que estaba perfectamente sana. Bueno, el doctor dijo que es una mezcla muy compleja de medicamentos que no puedo pronunciar, pero confiamos en él completamente, dijo mi madre mientras se secaba el sudor de la frente. Me incliné hacia adelante con una sonrisa de tiburón y les pregunté por qué los registros del hospital que revisé ayer no mostraban cirugías programadas para nadie con nuestro apellido. La atmósfera en la habitación cambió instantáneamente de lúgubre a hostil cuando se dieron cuenta de que no me estaba comportando como el obediente cajero automático al que estaban acostumbradas a manipular. El rostro de mi madre se puso de un rojo violento mientras abandonaba el acto de la cuidadora afligida y dejaba que su verdadera naturaleza agresiva saliera a la superficie. Pisoteó el suelo y me gritó con veneno en la voz. ¿Por qué haces tantas preguntas técnicas inútiles cuando tu hermana yace allí de dolor esperando que la ambulancia la salve? Dame dinero ahora mismo para que podamos irnos. Whitney se sentó en la cama y se olvidó de actuar débil mientras señalaba el maletín y exigía que dejara de perder el tiempo porque estaba cansada de esperar. Me levanté lentamente y puse mi mano en los pestillos del maletín mientras veía cómo sus ojos se iluminaban con pura codicia, sin adulterar. Abrí las cerraduras con un fuerte chasquido que resonó en la habitación silenciosa y metí la mano para agarrar la gruesa pila de papeles que había preparado. En lugar de los pulcros fajos de billetes de $100 que estaban saboreando, saqué un puñado de fotografías brillantes y documentos legales. Lancé las fotografías al aire con un movimiento violento, haciendo que llovieran sobre la cama del hospital y cubrieran a Whitney con imágenes de su propio engaño. Las fotos mostraban a Whitney bailando sobre mesas en clubes nocturnos y tomando el sol en resort de lujo, mientras sostenía cócteles caros durante las mismas semanas en que afirmaba estar en quimioterapia. Mi madre arrebató una de las fotos del aire y la miró con horror mientras el color desaparecía de su rostro porque se dio cuenta de que el juego había terminado por completo. Las miré a ambas a los ojos y pronuncié el veredicto final con una voz que sacudió las paredes de la casa que mi padre construyó. No hay $50,000 en ninguna parte de esta habitación porque lo único que les traje es una citación judicial federal y una prueba irrefutable de su fraude. La obra ha terminado. Cuando la evidencia condenatoria cayó como confeti alrededor de la cama del hospital, la atmósfera en la sala de estar se hizo añicos en un caos absoluto cuando la realidad de su situación finalmente se apoderó de ellas. Whitney miró la fotografía brillante de sí misma bebiendo vodka, y su reacción fue un terror puramente instintivo en lugar de la actuación calculada que había mantenido durante años. Se olvidó por completo de que se suponía que estaba parcialmente paralizada por un dolor agonizante porque saltó del colchón con la agilidad de una atleta sana. Se arrancó la pesada bufanda de lana de la cabeza presa del pánico para revelar una melena espesa y lustrosa que obviamente había sido peinada profesionalmente solo unos días antes. La visión grotesca de ella de pie allí, luciendo perfectamente saludable mientras estaba rodeada de pruebas de su engaño, me revolvió el estómago porque resaltaba cuán profundamente habían explotado mi confianza. Se apresuró a recoger los papeles del suelo mientras emitía ruidos incoherentes de negación. Pero el gran volumen de pruebas que había arrojado sobre la mesa hizo que sus esfuerzos fueran completamente inútiles. Observé sus movimientos frenéticos con un frío desapego antes de darles la noticia que pondría fin efectivamente a las cómodas vidas que habían construido sobre mi sufrimiento. Hablé por encima de su murmullo de pánico para informarles que mi abogado ya había presentado cargos formales contra ambas por fraude electrónico y robo mediante engaño esa misma mañana. Expliqué con terminología legal precisa que, como había transferido el dinero a través de las fronteras estatales desde Chicago a Indiana, su pequeña estafa familiar ahora se clasificaba como un grave delito federal que conllevaba penas de prisión obligatorias. Vi el color desaparecer del rostro de mi madre cuando se dio cuenta de que su edad no la protegería de las consecuencias de conspirar para cometer un delito grave contra su propia hija. Hice una pausa para que el peso de esas palabras se asentara antes de asestar el golpe final que sabía que heriría sus corazones materialistas más que la amenaza de encarcelamiento. También deberían saber que el banco ya se está moviendo para congelar sus activos y esta casa será embargada para pagar cada centavo que me robaron en los últimos 2 años. Mi madre soltó un grito ahogado que fue realmente genuino por primera vez ese día. Mientras la aterradora realidad de quedarse sin hogar se derrumbaba sobre ella, miró alrededor de la sala de estar que había intentado renovar con mi dinero y se dio cuenta de que estaba a punto de perder el único santuario que había conocido. Se derrumbó de rodillas en el suelo de madera y se arrastró hacia mí con las manos extendidas para agarrar el dobladillo de mis pantalones en una patética muestra de autoconservación. Lágrimas que finalmente eran reales corrían por su rostro mientras decidía sacrificar a su hija favorita para salvar su propio pellejo. Audrey, por favor. No puedes hacerle esto a tu propia madre porque soy una anciana que no sabe nada de leyes. Fue Whitney quien me dijo que lo hiciera porque quería dinero para ropa de diseñador y vacaciones. Así que, por favor, no me envíes a la cárcel por sus errores. La traición hizo que Whitney perdiera el poco de cordura que le quedaba, y se abalanzó sobre la mujer que la había mimado durante 29 años. Empujó a nuestra madre hacia atrás con tal fuerza que la mujer mayor cayó sobre la pila de fotografías incriminatorias y las esparció aún más por la habitación. Whitney gritó con una voz que era cruda de odio y expuso el verdadero origen de su plan para que todo el vecindario lo escuchara. Eres una bruja mentirosa porque esta fue tu idea desde el principio para que finalmente pudieras permitirte esa renovación de la cocina y la piscina. No te atrevas a culparme a mí cuando eras tú quien escribía los guiones para cada llamada telefónica y me decías cómo actuar como enferma. Me quedé allí como una estatua, observando a las 2 personas por las que había sacrificado mi juventud mientras se destrozaban mutuamente como animales salvajes peleando por un trozo de carne. La visión de ellas gritando y arañándose en medio de las ruinas de sus mentiras me llenó de un asco tan profundo que no pude soportar respirar el mismo aire ni un segundo más. Estaban tan consumidas por su odio mutuo y el miedo a la pobreza que ni siquiera se dieron cuenta cuando les di la espalda. Caminé firmemente hacia la puerta principal abierta sin decir una palabra más porque no quedaba nada que decir a personas que habían vendido sus almas por dinero. Sus voces gritando me siguieron por la entrada y resonaron en la tranquila calle suburbana. Pero no miré hacia atrás ni una sola vez mientras me subía a mi coche de alquiler. Arranqué el motor y me alejé de los escombros de mi pasado sintiendo una extraña sensación de ligereza mientras la casa desaparecía en mi espejo retrovisor por última vez. Han pasado 2 meses desde aquella fatídica tarde, y actualmente estoy sentada en el soleado balcón de mi nuevo apartamento mientras disfruto de una taza de té caliente sin ningún peso pesado presionando mis cansados hombros. El silencio que me rodea ahora ya no es la tranquila soledad de una vida dedicada a sacrificarse por los demás, sino la pacífica tranquilidad de una libertad que finalmente me he ganado. El sistema legal se movió con sorprendente rapidez porque la montaña de pruebas que proporcioné era tan innegable que mi madre y mi hermana no tuvieron absolutamente ningún margen para maniobrar o negociar un castigo más leve. El banco actuó sin piedad para embargar la propiedad en Fort Wayne porque los pagos de la hipoteca se habían descuidado en favor de la compra de artículos de lujo y la casa se vendió en una subasta pública la semana pasada. Recibí una parte significativa de las ganancias como restitución ordenada por el tribunal, lo que me permitió recuperar una buena cantidad de dinero que tontamente había vertido en su pozo sin fondo de codicia. Fue una victoria agridulce ver cómo la casa de mi infancia se vendía a extraños, pero sabía que la casa había dejado de ser un hogar en el momento en que decidieron usarla como escenario para su cruel teatro. Mi madre y Whitney se han visto reducidas a vivir en un apartamento de eficiencia estrecho y destartalado en el lado indeseable de la ciudad, donde la calefacción no es fiable y los vecinos son ruidosos. Lograron evitar la cárcel al declararse culpables y aceptar un estricto acuerdo de libertad condicional. Pero el juez se aseguró de que sus vidas no fueran nada parecidas a la existencia cómoda a la que se sentían con derecho. Ambas están obligadas a trabajar en empleos de tiempo completo para pagar sus honorarios legales y las multas judiciales restantes, lo que es una justicia poética que me produce una sombría sensación de satisfacción. Mi madre actualmente está embolsando comestibles en un supermercado local, donde tiene que estar de pie durante 8 horas al día mientras soporta las miradas compasivas de personas que solían ser sus vecinas. Whitney se ha visto obligada a aceptar un trabajo como lavaplatos en un restaurante, que es exactamente el mismo tipo de trabajo honesto del que solía burlarse de mí cuando era un adolescente que apoyaba a la familia. Escuché por ahí que llega a casa todas las noches con las manos agrietadas y la espalda dolorida, lo que la obliga a comprender finalmente el valor de $1 ganado con sudor en lugar de engaño. He utilizado el dinero recuperado de la demanda para finalmente invertir en mi propia felicidad reservando unas largas vacaciones en Europa, que es un sueño que había enterrado bajo montones de facturas médicas durante 16 años. También di un pago inicial para este hermoso apartamento en Chicago, donde la única persona de la que tengo que ocuparme es de mí misma, y las únicas facturas en el mostrador son las mías. Todavía mantengo una cálida correspondencia con la señora Miller porque ella es la verdadera heroína de esta historia y le envié una enorme cesta de regalo llena de alimentos gourmet para agradecerle por abrirme los ojos. Me envía cartas actualizándome sobre los chismes del vecindario, pero es lo suficientemente amable como para nunca mencionar a mi madre o a mi hermana a menos que yo pregunte porque sabe que he cerrado ese capítulo para siempre. He bloqueado todos los números de teléfono y cuentas de redes sociales asociados con mi familia biológica porque me doy cuenta de que compartir ADN no te obliga a tolerar el abuso. Ahora son solo extraños que comparten mi apellido y no siento absolutamente ninguna culpa cuando me voy a dormir por la noche sabiendo que finalmente están enfrentando las consecuencias de sus propias acciones. Hay una lección profunda aquí sobre la peligrosa línea entre la amabilidad y la autodestrucción, porque a menudo confundimos permitir un comportamiento tóxico con amor incondicional. Aprendí de la manera difícil que no puedes salvar a personas que están tratando activamente de ahogarte, solo para poder usar tu cuerpo como una balsa para mantenerse a flote. La verdadera fuerza no se trata de cuánta carga puedes llevar por los demás, sino de tener el coraje de soltar la carga cuando te das cuenta de que nunca fue tuya para llevarla en primer lugar. Muchas gracias por escuchar mi historia hasta el final. Y espero que te dé la fuerza para examinar las relaciones en tu propia vida. Por favor, comparte tus pensamientos en los comentarios a continuación porque me encantaría saber si alguna vez has tenido que tomar la difícil decisión de cortar con un miembro de la familia por tu propia paz mental.